Please. Please, sir. I need help. Can you help me?
Okay.
When 9-year-old Maddie handed a crumpled $5 bill to ex-gang member Raphael, she had no idea this moment would save her entire neighborhood. The number written on that bill would unlock a decades-old promise that changed everything. Like this video, subscribe for more incredible stories, and comment where you're watching from. The taxi's worn seats smelled of disinfectant and old coffee as it pulled up to the modest apartment building on Maple Street. Evelyn Blake's weathered fingers traced the plastic hospital bracelet still circling her wrist, the adhesive leaving red marks on her pale skin. Beside her, 9-year-old Madison, Maddie, pressed her face against the rain-streaked window, her breath fogging the glass. "Abuela, the lights are on," Maddie whispered, her voice carrying a tremor that made Evelyn's chest tighten. The front door stood slightly ajar, warm yellow light spilling onto the cracked concrete steps. Voices drifted from inside, unfamiliar laughter that felt wrong in their small sanctuary. Evelyn's hand shook as she counted out wrinkled bills for the driver, her medication making her movements slow and deliberate. They climbed the steps together, Maddie's small hand finding Evelyn's larger one. The hallway smelled different, dust particles dancing in fluorescent light, the familiar scent of Mrs. Herrera's cooking overshadowed by something antiseptic and invasive. Inside their apartment, a man in an expensive charcoal suit stood measuring their living room wall with a metal tape. His shoes were leather, polished to a shine that reflected the overhead bulb. 2 other men rifled through kitchen cabinets, their movements clinical and dismissive. Papers covered Evelyn's dining table, documents stamped with official seals, dense paragraphs of legal text that swam before her tired eyes. "Excuse me." Evelyn's voice came out smaller than intended. "This is my home." The suit turned, his smile practiced and cold. "Mrs. Blake, I'm Mr. Coleman from Westfield Property Management. We tried to reach you, but..." He gestured toward the hospital bracelet. "We have legal authorization to proceed with the assessment." Maddie stepped closer to her grandmother, her backpack sliding off one shoulder. Down the hallway, apartment doors cracked open just enough for curious eyes to peer through. Mrs. Ruiz from 3B quickly looked away when Evelyn's gaze met hers. The sound of measuring tape snapping against walls echoed like small gunshots. "I don't understand," Evelyn said, reaching for the papers with trembling fingers. "My rent is current. I've lived here 12 years. Ma'am, the property has been sold. New ownership requires adjustments to existing leases. There are code violations, overdue fees." Coleman's words blended into a hum of incomprehensible terminology, while one of his associates took photos of their modest furniture. The fluorescent light above flickered, casting unstable shadows across the room. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, feel sweat beading despite the evening chill. Maddie's grip tightened on her hand. Such small fingers, trying to anchor them both. "You have 30 days, Coleman continued, sliding a final document across the table. "Sign here to acknowledge receipt of notice." Mrs. Herrera's door clicked shut. Mr. Santos from downstairs turned up his television. The hallway emptied of witnesses, leaving only the sound of rain beginning to tap against windows and the mechanical whir of measuring equipment. Evelyn's signature came out shaky and uneven. When she looked up, the men were already packing their briefcases. Their business concluded with the efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. Coleman's aftershave lingered in the air long after he'd gone, mixing with the scent of their interrupted dinner still sitting cold on the counter. Outside, Evelyn sank onto the front steps, rain misting her gray hair. Maddie sat beside her, both of them staring at the streetlights blurring through their tears. The building that had been their home for over a decade suddenly felt hollow behind them, as if something essential had been drained from its walls in the span of 30 minutes. A car passed, its headlights sweeping across their faces before disappearing into the night. Evelyn closed her eyes and felt the weight of everything she couldn't understand pressing down on her chest. Legal words, official stamps, and the terrible certainty that she'd lost something precious without ever knowing how the fight had begun. The community center's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Evelyn spread the legal documents across a folding table, her reading glasses reflecting the harsh illumination through the thin walls. The rhythmic bounce of basketballs echoed from the gymnasium, mixed with shouts in Spanish and English from teenagers practicing late into the evening. Maddie sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, digging through her worn backpack with the determination of someone searching for buried treasure. Her fingers found the small metal tin hidden in the side pocket, a container that had once held mints but now held something far more precious. Inside, Wrapped in tissue paper that smelled faintly of her father's cologne, lay a $5 bill. Written in blue ink along the margin were the numbers 327 and a date from 3 years ago. Maddie could almost hear her father's voice, serious in a way that had made her stomach flutter with importance. If everything goes wrong, mija, you find a man named Rafael Ortiz. You give him this, and you tell him Daniel Blake needs his promise kept. Across the center's main room, Rafael wiped down tables after the evening tutoring session had ended. His movements were methodical, practiced, the rhythm of someone who found peace in simple tasks. His black hair was streaked with early gray despite his 34 years, and a small scar along his jawline caught the light when he turned his head. He was explaining fractions to a group of middle schoolers when Maddie approached, the $5 bill clutched in her small fist. Diego, a lanky 15-year-old with paint-stained fingers, was arguing about math homework. Marisol, 13 and fierce-eyed, was telling Rafael about kids from Roosevelt High trying to recruit her cousin. Mr. Rafael. Maddie's voice was barely above a whisper. He turned, noting her hospital bracelet, the way she held herself like someone carrying an adult's burden. "What can I do for you, sweetheart?" my dad said. "If everything went bad, I should find you." She extended the crumpled bill with shaking hands. "He said to give you this and tell you Daniel Blake needs his promise." The folding chair Rafael had been holding clattered to the floor. Diego and Marisol stopped their chatter, sensing the sudden shift in the room's energy. Rafael stared at the $5 bill, at the faded blue ink marking the edge, and felt 20 years collapse into this single moment. Daniel Blake. The name hit him like cold water, bringing with it the smell of rain on asphalt, the sound of sirens in the distance, and the weight of a debt he'd never imagined would be called in. His hands trembled slightly as he took the bill, his thumb tracing over the numbers that had once been scrawled on a different piece of paper. "In a different life. Where's your father, mija?" Rafael's voice was hoarse. "He died last year," Maddie said simply. "Cancer, but before that, he made me memorize everything. Rafael Ortiz at the community center on Maple Street. The $5 with 327. He said you'd know what it meant." The gymnasium sounds faded into background noise. Rafael remembered Daniel Blake's face. Not the way it must look now, but as it had been that night in the alley behind the liquor store. Young, terrified, bleeding from a gash across his forehead, but still managing to look Rafael in the eye and say words that would haunt him for decades. "I forgive you, but someday, you protect my family. Is that your grandmother?" Rafael nodded toward Evelyn, who was still bent over the legal documents, her thin shoulders curved with defeat. Maddie nodded. "They're taking our house. The man in the suit said we have to leave, but Abuela doesn't understand why. She's been sick, and everything's confusing, and I don't know what to do." Rafael knelt down until he was eye level with Maddie, this small girl who carried her father's memory like a sacred responsibility. Around them, Diego and Marisol had gone quiet, sensing they were witnessing something significant. The community center, with its peeling paint and mismatched furniture, suddenly felt like hallowed ground. "Tell me everything," Rafael said softly. "And I mean everything." The small office smelled of stale coffee and industrial carpet, with a single fluorescent light fixture that flickered every few minutes. Casting unstable shadows across the yellowed walls, Rafael closed the door behind them and gestured for Evelyn and Maddie to sit in the mismatched chairs that had been donated by a church 3 years earlier. Evelyn's hand shook as she laid out the documents. Lease agreements, violation notices, and legal papers dense with terminology that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. Rafael read each page slowly, his jaw tightening with every manipulative clause, every fabricated fee. "Mrs. Blake, this isn't right," he said finally, setting down a paper that claimed she owed thousands in administrative restructuring costs. "These charges, they're making things up. I don't understand legal things," Evelyn whispered, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting battles she couldn't name. "My husband always handled the paperwork. After he passed, I just tried to keep up with the rent, keep Maddie fed and in school." Rafael felt the familiar knot in his chest, the same feeling he'd carried for 20 years, ever since the night Daniel Blake could have destroyed his life, but chose mercy instead. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over contacts he hadn't called in months, numbers belonging to men who'd walked the same path from darkness to light. The first call went to Noah Delgado. "Rafael, man, it's been months." Noah's voice carried the sound of clinking tools and automotive exhaust. "I'm under the hood of a '98 Camry. Can this wait?" I need you, Raphael said simply. Daniel Blake's family. The line went silent, except for the distant sound of wrenches being set down. Noah had been there that night too, had watched Raphael stumble home covered in someone else's blood and shame. He'd also been there for the long road back, the meetings, the job training, the gradual building of something that could pass for redemption. I'll call Marcus to cover the shop, Noah said. Give me an hour. The second call was to Patrice King, who answered with the hairy deficiency of someone managing 15 cases with insufficient funding. Raphael, please tell me this is good news because I've had 3 emergency removals today and I need you to look at some documents, Raphael interrupted. Fraudulent eviction, probably. Family that can't fight back. Patrice's sigh carried the weight of every injustice she'd witnessed in her years as a social worker. Send me photos of everything. I'll be there after I finish this custody hearing, Leon Marshall answered on the first ring, the sound of clippers buzzing in the background. Let me guess, he said, his voice carrying the warm authority that made him a natural mediator. Someone needs help, and you're calling in the old debts. Something like that, Raphael said, watching Maddie color in a picture book she'd found on the shelf, her small fingers gripping the crayon with the concentration of someone trying to forget adult worries. Remember Daniel Blake, the guy who... Leon's voice dropped lower. Yeah, I remember. What do you need? Everything, Raphael said. Every skill we learned the hard way, every contact we made climbing out. This family, they saved my life once. Now I need to save theirs. As evening fell over the community center, cars began pulling into the parking lot. Noah arrived first, still wearing his mechanic's coveralls, grease under his fingernails and worry in his dark eyes. Patrice followed 20 minutes later, briefcase in hand and phone pressed to her ear. Finishing a conversation with someone who clearly didn't want to do her a favor. Leon was last, locking up his barbershop and walking the 3 blocks to the center, nodding to neighbors who called out greetings in Spanish and English. He paused at the entrance, running a hand over his graying beard, remembering other meetings in other rooms where they'd planned different kinds of strategies for different kinds of wars. Inside the flickering office, Raphael introduced everyone to Evelyn and Maddie. The older woman looked overwhelmed by this sudden gathering of strangers, but Maddie studied each face with the solemnity of someone who understood that these men might be their last hope. Okay, Patrice said, spreading the documents across the desk. Show me what we're dealing with. Outside, the community center settled into evening quiet, but inside the small office, something was beginning that would ripple through the neighborhood for months to come. The next morning brought the smell of fresh bread from the panaderia on the corner, and the distant sound of bachata music floating from someone's radio. Raphael led the group through the narrow hallway of Evelyn's building, noting details his former life had trained him to observe, escape routes, blind spots, the kind of information that might matter if this situation escalated. The hallway held the mingled aromas of everyday life. Carmen Ruiz's Café Cubano, brewing in 3B, the scent of Luis and Rosa Herrera's breakfast eggs and beans from 2A, and the industrial-strength cleaning products the building manager used to mask problems rather than solve them. Noah arrived wearing his cleanest work shirt, tools deliberately absent from his belt. He'd learned that appearing non-threatening was often more powerful than looking ready for trouble. Patrice carried a leather briefcase that had seen better days, but still conveyed professional competence. Leon wore his good jeans and a pressed button-down, the unofficial uniform of someone who understood the importance of respect in community spaces. They knocked softly on doors, introducing themselves in both English and Spanish. Somos amigos de la señora Blake. We're here to help with the housing situation. Most neighbors cracked their doors just enough to see who was speaking, fear evident in their careful responses. They came to my apartment too, whispered Mrs. Santos from 1C, glancing nervously down the hallway before continuing. Said my lease had problems, but I've been here 8 years. I don't understand the papers they gave me. Mr. Coleman appeared as if summoned by their presence, his polished shoes clicking against the worn linoleum. Today his suit was navy blue, and he carried a tablet that he tapped with the precision of someone accustomed to intimidating people with technology and terminology. I don't recall scheduling any appointments, Coleman said, his voice carrying the particular condescension reserved for people he considered beneath his notice. These are private residential matters, public housing concerns, Patrice replied smoothly, pulling out her own tablet and discreetly starting a voice recording. I'm a licensed social worker investigating potential violations of tenant rights. These gentlemen are community advocates. Raphael watched Coleman's face carefully, noting the micro-expressions his old life had taught him to read. the slight tightening around the eyes when challenged, the way his grip shifted on the tablet, small tells that suggested someone hiding something significant. Mrs. Blake signed all necessary documentation, Coleman continued, but his eyes darted to the gathering neighbors. If she doesn't understand standard lease terminology, that's unfortunately not the property management's responsibility. Standard lease terminology doesn't typically include fabricated fees, Leon said quietly, his barbershop diplomacy training evident in his tone. We've reviewed the documents. More doors opened along the hallway. The Herrera couple stepped out, followed by Mrs. Ruiz carrying a cup of coffee that steamed in the cool morning air. A young mother with 2 small children peered around her partially open door, curiosity overcoming caution. Coleman pulled out his phone, jabbing at the screen with increasing irritation. His conversation was brief and sharp, conducted in the kind of code language that suggested layers of authority somewhere above his pay grade. This matter will proceed according to legal requirements, he said finally, already moving toward the stairs. Interference with lawful property management activities could have consequences. After he left, the hallway buzzed with quiet conversation. Mrs. Herrera approached Evelyn directly, speaking in rapid Spanish that made Maddie smile for the first time in days. Someone talking to her grandmother like a neighbor instead of a problem to be solved. She says they got papers too, Maddie translated. Scary papers with big words. And Mrs. Ruiz says the man came to her door last week asking questions about who lives here and how long. Raphael felt pieces clicking together in his mind. Patterns emerging from what had initially seemed like an isolated problem. He pulled out a small notebook, a habit from his community center work, and began writing down details, names, dates, the specific language Coleman had used. This is bigger than one apartment, he said to the group as they gathered outside the building. This feels like a pattern. Noah nodded toward the street where a black sedan sat idling near the corner, its windows tinted dark enough to obscure any occupants. And were definitely being watched. Noah spent the morning at the property management office, playing the role of a concerned tenant inquiring about lease renewals. The waiting room smelled of artificial air freshener and featured chairs that had been designed for discomfort, plastic seats that encouraged brief visits and quick departures. He observed everything with the methodical attention his years as a mechanic had taught him. The way the receptionist's eyes darted to a specific file cabinet when certain names were mentioned. The stack of identical legal forms kept separate from standard paperwork. The closed-door meeting that produced raised voices in a language he couldn't identify but tones he recognized as argumentative. Meanwhile, Patrice worked at a computer in the community center, her fingers clicking steadily across keys as she navigated public records databases that most people didn't know existed, property transfers, tax assessments, business licenses, the digital paper trail of a neighborhood slowly being transformed by people who had never lived there. Look at this, she said, turning the screen toward Raphael. Every property that's changed hands in the past 6 months has been purchased by shell companies, different names, but they all trace back to the same law firm. Leon worked his own network, cutting hair and listening to the conversations that flowed as naturally as water in his shop. Mrs. Martinez mentioned eviction threats while he trimmed her husband's beard. The young teacher from the elementary school talked about students missing classes because families were moving suddenly, disrupting children's education mid-semester. It's not random, Leon reported that evening as they gathered again in the community center office. At least 12 families in a 6-block radius, all gotten the same type of notices, all confused by the legal language, all too scared or overwhelmed to fight back. Raphael spent his day accompanying Evelyn and Maddie through their normal routine, grocery shopping at the Mercadito, where the owner spoke to Evelyn in gentle Spanish, sharing coffee with neighbors on the building's front steps, walking Maddie to school through streets that had been safe yesterday but felt different today. He watched Evelyn count coins twice before buying pan dulce, saw how she checked over her shoulder when footsteps echoed behind them, noticed the way Maddie stayed closer to her grandmother's side than a 9-year-old should have to. These small changes spoke of fear, seeping into the ordinary moments that should have been peaceful. That evening, Patrice spread printouts across every available surface in the office. Property records, business filings, timeline charts she'd created to track the pattern of purchases and evictions. The paper trail painted a picture of systematic displacement, surgical in its precision. Here's what I found, she said, pointing to a highlighted section of corporate filings. Westfield Property Management is owned by Coastal Development Associates. Coastal Development is owned by Pacific Investment Holdings, And Pacific Investment Holdings just got a massive rezoning approval for mixed-use development in this exact neighborhood. Mixed-use development, Raphael repeated slowly. Which means what? Luxury condos where grocery stores used to be? Coffee shops that charge $5 for what Mrs. Herrera makes for 50 cents? The kind of improvement that makes everything better for people who don't live here yet. Noah wiped grease from his hands with a shop rag, his expression grim. So they need to empty the buildings first. Make sure no long-term tenants with legal rights are around to complicate things. And they target people like Mrs. Blake, Leon added. People who don't have lawyers, who don't understand the system, who won't fight back because they don't know how. Through the thin walls, they could hear teenagers in the basketball court, their voices carrying the easy confidence of young people who believe their neighborhood would always be there for them. Raphael thought about Diego and Marisol, about all the kids he mentored who might come back from college to find their childhood streets transformed beyond recognition. There's something else, Patrice said quietly, pulling out a different folder. I found records of 2 other buildings where this same pattern happened. Trumped-up violations, confused tenants, quick evictions. Both are now construction sites. Raphael stared at the photographs of empty lots where families used to live, feeling anger and determination war in his chest. This wasn't just about Evelyn and Maddie anymore. This was about every person who'd ever been made to feel small by someone with a briefcase and a legal document they didn't understand. So what do we do? He asked. Patrice smiled, and for the first time in days, it wasn't a sad expression. We fight back, but we do it smart. The black sedan became a regular presence, always parked within view of the building, but never close enough to be obviously threatening. It appeared at different times. Sometimes morning when Maddie left for school, sometimes evening when neighbors returned from work. The message was clear without being explicit. You are being watched. Evelyn found the first note tucked under her windshield wiper after a doctor's appointment. Simple white paper, words printed from a computer. Some fights aren't worth having. Smart people know when to let go. She brought it to Raphael with hands that trembled slightly, the paper damp from her nervous perspiration. Noah discovered his own message taped to his toolbox at the auto shop where he worked. His boss, Marcus, watched him read it with concerned eyes. You getting mixed up in something? Marcus asked. Because you got a kid at home, and this neighborhood's got enough trouble already. The note to Noah was more specific. Mechanics should stick to fixing cars. Family men should think about their family first. Leon found his warning slipped under the door of his barber shop. The paper scented faintly with expensive cologne that seemed designed to emphasize the contrast between their world and the world of whoever was sending these messages. Barbershops can fail inspections for the smallest violations. Licenses can be questioned, just saying. But it was the approach to Evelyn that crossed the line from intimidation into manipulation. Mr. Coleman returned with a different demeanor, warmer, more grandfatherly, carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers and speaking in the gentle tones reserved for elderly relatives. He sat in her living room, admiring pictures of Maddie, commenting on how difficult it must be to raise a granddaughter alone. These legal matters, he said, pulling out a much simpler document than the previous papers. They don't have to be complicated. Sign here. We'll provide a cash settlement for the inconvenience. Help you find a nice place in a quieter neighborhood. Somewhere safer for a young girl to grow up. Maddie watched from the kitchen doorway as Coleman smiled his practiced smile, his voice like honey over broken glass. She remembered her father's warnings about people who spoke softly while doing loud things. People who hurt you while pretending to help. Raphael arrived to find Coleman's business card on Evelyn's coffee table and the older woman staring at the simple document with confused hope. The cash amount written on the settlement offer would cover first month's rent somewhere else. But Raphael knew it wouldn't cover the loss of community, the severing of roots that had grown deep over 12 years. Did you sign anything? Raphael asked gently. I told him I needed to think, Evelyn said. But Raphael, maybe he's right. Maybe it would be easier to just go somewhere else, start over. Raphael sat down across from her, choosing his words carefully. Mrs. Blake, do you want to leave this apartment? No, she whispered. This is where Eduardo and I brought Maddie when her parents died. This is where she learned to walk, learned to speak Spanish, learned to trust us. Her father's pictures are on these walls. Our memories are in every room. Then we don't let them take it. That evening, Raphael called a meeting with Noah, Patrice, and Leon. They gathered not in the community center, but in Leon's barber shop after hours. The chairs pushed back to create a circle, the scent of aftershave and leather mixing with the tension in the air. "They're escalating," Raphael said, showing the others the notes and describing Coleman's visit. "But notice what they're not doing. No direct threats, no physical intimidation. They're staying just inside legal boundaries. Because they don't need violence," Patrice observed. "They have lawyers and judges and paperwork. Why risk criminal charges when you can destroy people legally?" Leon nodded, remembering his own journey from anger to strategy, from immediate reaction to careful planning. "Which means we stay smart too. We document everything, build a case, and find the right forum to present it." Noah looked around at the faces of his 3 friends, men who'd traveled the hard road from destruction to construction, who'd learned to channel old skills into new purposes. "So what's our move?" Raphael pulled out the $5 bill Maddie had given him, smoothing it flat on the barber chair's armrest. The numbers NAR327 seemed to glow under the shop's fluorescent lights, a reminder of promises made and debts that transcended money. "We organize," he said. "We bring the whole community together, get everyone's story out in the open, make this too public for them to handle quietly. A community meeting," Patrice agreed. "Somewhere official, somewhere that sends a message." Leon smiled, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I know exactly the place." Patrice spent the week building a case that could stand up in court, her dining room table covered with documents, timelines, and evidence photos that told the story of systematic fraud. She'd requested lease agreements from other affected tenants, compared signatures that varied wildly from document to document, and documented fees that appeared on some leases but not others for identical apartments. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Carmen Ruiz's nephew, who worked as a delivery driver and had overheard a conversation outside a law office downtown. 2 men in expensive suits discussing Phase 2 and accelerated timeline for the Maple Street properties. He said they were talking about having everything cleared by Christmas, Carmen told Raphael in rapid Spanish while Maddie translated. "They want to start construction in January, but only if all the old tenants are gone first." Leon made contact with Miguel Santos, a former employee of Coastal Development who now drove for a ride-sharing app. Their conversation happened in the back seat of Miguel's Honda Civic during a routine ride to the grocery store, Leon paying for a trip that lasted much longer than the distance required. "I wasn't supposed to see the files," Miguel said, eyes darting to the rearview mirror out of habit. "But when you're cleaning offices at night, sometimes papers get left out. Building plans, budget projections. They're planning a whole complex, luxury apartments starting at $3,000 a month." "What about the current tenants?" Leon asked. "What current tenants, according to their timeline? All these buildings should be empty by spring. They budgeted for legal fees and relocation costs, but the numbers are low, like they expect most people to just disappear." Noah used his day off to visit Maria Gonzalez, an elderly woman who'd been evicted from a building 3 blocks away 6 months earlier. He found her living with her daughter's family, sleeping on a couch in a cramped apartment that smelled of too many people and not enough space. "They said my son-in-law's lease wasn't valid because of my name being on some old paperwork," Maria explained, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd given up fighting. "Too confusing. Too many lawyers. We just packed and left. Did you try to fight it? With what money? My daughter works 2 jobs just to keep us fed. We don't have money for lawyers and court papers and all that." Noah looked around the overcrowded apartment, thinking about his own 7-year-old son and what it would mean to lose the stability of a permanent home. "Would you be willing to talk about what happened if we could guarantee you wouldn't be alone?" Maria's eyes brightened slightly, the first spark of hope Noah had seen from her. "You mean other people had this happen too?" Meanwhile, Raphael worked with Evelyn to document every interaction with property management, every confusing phone call, every moment when she'd been made to feel stupid for not understanding language designed to confuse. Evelyn's notebook grew thick with details written in her careful handwriting, each entry a small act of resistance against people who expected her to disappear quietly. Maddie helped by drawing pictures of their apartment, their neighborhood, the people who made their community feel like home. Her 9-year-old perspective captured things adults missed, the way Mr. Herrera always checked to make sure she got inside safely, how Mrs. Ruiz saved her the best pastries, the sound of laughter echoing in the courtyard when families gathered for birthday parties. "This is my story too," Maddie told Raphael seriously as she colored a picture of their building. "And I want to tell it." Patrice assembled everything into a comprehensive presentation: photos, documents, audio recordings of Coleman's visits, testimony from affected families. The evidence painted a clear picture of fraud designed to displace an entire community for corporate profit. "We have them," she announced at their evening meeting. "Forged signatures, fabricated fees, non-existent violations. But we need the right audience to present this to." Leon leaned back in his barbershop chair, considering strategy the way he'd once planned very different kinds of operations. "I talked to Father Martinez at St. Catherine's. He'll let us use the church hall for a community meeting, and I know someone who might be able to get Councilman Rodriguez to attend." "Will people come?" Raphael asked. "If we do this right," Leon said, "they won't just come. They'll bring everyone they know." The church hall smelled of furniture polish and decades of prayer, with afternoon light filtering through stained glass windows that painted rainbow patches across the worn wooden floors. Raphael and Noah worked together, setting up folding chairs in neat rows, their movements efficient from years of community center experience organizing events that mattered to people who rarely had their voices heard. Patrice tested the microphone system that Father Martinez had borrowed from the main sanctuary, her voice echoing slightly in the space as she ran through technical checks. She'd spent the morning creating presentation slides on her laptop, each image carefully chosen to tell the story clearly. Before and after photos of displaced families, document comparisons that showed obvious forgeries, maps highlighting the pattern of targeted evictions. Leon worked his network with the precision of someone who understood that community organizing was really about relationship building. He stopped by every business on Maple Street, talked to regular customers at his shop, made phone calls to people who trusted his judgment. His barbershop became an informal information center where people could ask questions about the meeting and what it might accomplish. "We're not asking anyone to do anything dangerous," Leon explained to Mrs. Chen from the dry cleaners. "We're just asking people to show up and listen, to let their neighbors know they're not alone in this." Raphael spent the week coaching Evelyn through what she wanted to say, helping her practice speaking into a microphone without her voice disappearing into nervousness. They sat in the community center's main room during quiet hours, Evelyn reading from notes written in her careful handwriting, while Raphael offered gentle suggestions about pacing and projection. "I'm not good at speaking to crowds," Evelyn said after her third attempt at explaining how the eviction notice had made her feel. "You don't have to be good at it," Raphael replied. "You just have to be honest. Tell them about coming home from the hospital and finding strangers in your living room. Tell them about Maddie asking why people want to take their home away. That's all anyone needs to hear." Maddie insisted on practicing her own contribution, the story of the $5 bill and her father's promise. She stood on a chair in their living room, clutching the worn bill while recounting how Daniel Blake had made her memorize Raphael's name and the number 327. "My papa said some people keep promises even when it's hard," Maddie practiced saying, her voice growing stronger each time. "And some people help even when they don't have to." He said Raphael was that kind of person. Word spread through unofficial channels, conversations at the bus stop, discussions while waiting in line at the grocery store, messages passed between parents at school pickup. Mrs. Herrera called her sister in the next neighborhood. Carmen Ruiz mentioned it to her prayer group. The young mother from 1D told other parents at the playground. Diego and Marisol volunteered to help with setup, arriving early to arrange chairs and test equipment. They'd witnessed enough community meetings to know that details mattered. Comfortable seating, good acoustics, coffee brewing in the back for people who worked late shifts and came straight from their jobs. "You think people will really show up?" Diego asked Raphael while they hung a banner Leon had painted with careful lettering. "Community meeting, housing rights and tenant protection. I think people are tired of feeling helpless," Raphael replied. "And I think they're tired of facing problems alone." Father Martinez had agreed to open the meeting with a brief blessing, his presence lending institutional weight to what might otherwise seem like just another complaint session. His thick white hair and gentle manner made him a trusted figure in the neighborhood, someone who'd baptized children, buried grandparents, and counseled families through every kind of crisis. As evening approached, Councilman Rodriguez's assistant called to confirm he would attend, bringing a staff member to take notes and a small recording device for his own documentation. The political implications weren't lost on anyone. Rodriguez represented this district and would face re-election next year. "He knows this could be a test," Patrice observed as they made final preparations. "How he handles this meeting will tell the community what kind of representative he really is." Leon arrived with a cooler of ice water and paper cups, while Carmen Ruiz and several other women brought homemade cookies and coffee in large thermoses. The scent of fresh coffee mixed with furniture polish and nervous anticipation as the first attendees began arriving 20 minutes before the scheduled start time. Raphael stood at the back of the hall, watching neighbors file in. People he'd known for years, families he'd worked with at the community center, elderly couples who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades. As they found seats and exchanged quiet greetings, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. In his pocket, Maddie's $5 bill rustled against his fingers, a reminder that some promises could only be kept by bringing an entire community together. The church hall filled beyond capacity, with folding chairs packed into every available row and people standing along the walls when seats ran out. The crowd represented the neighborhood's diversity: elderly Mexican couples who'd immigrated decades ago, young families with children balanced on laps, teenagers who'd walked over from the basketball court still wearing their practice clothes. Councilman Rodriguez arrived precisely on time, accompanied by an assistant who carried a tablet and the focused demeanor of someone prepared to document everything said. His presence created a subtle shift in energy, conversations becoming more formal as neighbors recognized the political significance of having an elected official witness their stories. Father Martinez opened with a brief blessing in both Spanish and English, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd shepherded this community through generations of challenges. "We gather tonight not in anger, but in hope," he said, trusting that when good people come together, justice has a chance to flourish. Patrice took the podium first, her presentation methodical and devastating. She displayed side-by-side comparisons of lease agreements, highlighting signatures that varied dramatically between documents supposedly signed by the same person. Property records scrolled across the laptop screen, showing the pattern of shell companies and rapid ownership transfers that preceded eviction notices. "What you're seeing," Patrice explained, "is not random. This is systematic displacement, designed to clear properties for redevelopment. The forged signatures, the fabricated fees, the confusing legal language. It's all calculated to make families feel they have no choice but to leave." Murmurs rippled through the audience as neighbors recognized their own experiences in Patrice's documentation. Mrs. Santos from 1C raised her hand and spoke in halting English. "They tell me I owe money for things I never heard of. Inspection fees, improvement costs. Where do these numbers come from?" Leon took over, his barbershop diplomacy skills evident as he guided the conversation. "Maria Gonzalez is here tonight. 6 months ago. She was forced out of her apartment using the same tactics being used now on Maple Street." "Maria, would you tell us what happened?" The elderly woman stood slowly, her voice barely reaching the back rows even with the microphone. "They made me feel stupid," she said simply, "like I was too old, too ignorant to understand my own lease. They used big words and showed me papers that didn't make sense. And when I asked questions, they made me feel like I was wasting their time." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Recognizing the universal experience of being dismissed by people in authority positions, children sensed the adult tension, moving closer to their parents while teenagers listened with the focused attention of young people, learning how power works in the real world. Mr. Coleman appeared at the back of the hall, his expensive suit conspicuous among the community's work clothes and weekend attire. He'd brought his tablet and a woman with a briefcase who positioned herself strategically near the exit. Their presence created a visible tension, conversations faltering, as neighbors noticed they were being observed by the very people they'd come to confront. "Mrs. Blake," Leon said gently, "would you share your story?" Evelyn approached the microphone with visible nervousness, her prepared notes trembling slightly in her hands. Raphael moved closer to the front, offering silent encouragement as she adjusted the microphone stand to her height. 3 weeks ago, I came home from the hospital with my granddaughter," Evelyn began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "We found strangers in our apartment, measuring our walls, going through our belongings. They handed me papers I couldn't understand, and told me I had to leave the home where my husband and I raised Maddie after her parents died." Her voice cracked slightly on the word died, but she continued. "They made me feel like I was nothing. Like 12 years of paying rent on time, taking care of my neighbors, being part of this community, like none of that mattered because I couldn't understand their legal words." Coleman stepped forward, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to controlling narratives. "Mrs. Blake, with all due respect, clearly understood the terms of her lease modification when she signed—" "I never signed any lease modification," Evelyn interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "And the signature you have doesn't look like mine because it isn't mine." Patrice immediately displayed the signature comparison on screen, the differences obvious even to non-experts. The audience stirred, whispers building into conversation as the reality of fraud became undeniable. Then Maddie stood up, 9 years old and barely tall enough to see over the adults sitting in front of her. She made her way to the front of the hall with determined steps. Raphael started to intercede, thinking she was too young for this burden, but something in her expression stopped him. "I want to show everyone something," Maddie said, pulling the $5 bill from her pocket as she approached the microphone. The hall went silent, everyone straining to hear what this small girl had to say. "My papa gave me this before he died," she said, holding up the bill so everyone could see the numbers written in faded ink. "He told me if we ever needed help, really needed help, I should find a man named Raphael and give him this money with the number 327. Raphael felt every eye in the room turn toward him as Maddie continued. "My papa said Raphael used to make bad choices, but that people can change. He said Raphael changed because of kindness instead of punishment, and that someday Raphael would protect our family because that's what good people do. They keep promises even when it's hard." She turned to face Coleman directly. This small girl, staring down a grown man in an expensive suit. "My papa also said there are people who hurt families for money, and people who protect families because it's right. He said I would always be able to tell the difference." The silence in the hall was complete, broken only by the sound of someone's quiet crying and the distant hum of street traffic outside. Councilman Rodriguez stood up, his political instincts recognizing a moment that would define his relationship with this community. "Based on what I've heard tonight," he said, his voice carrying clearly without amplification, "I'm calling for an immediate investigation into these eviction procedures. All current notices are suspended pending review, and I'll be requesting that the district attorney examine these documents for possible criminal fraud." The hall erupted in applause, but Raphael was watching Coleman's face, noting the man's quick calculation that this situation had moved beyond his authority to control. As neighbors hugged and children cheered, Coleman and his associate were already moving toward the exit, phones pressed to their ears. The real work, Raphael knew, was just beginning. 6 months later, the neighborhood had settled into a different rhythm, one marked by small victories and the slow reconstruction of trust between neighbors who'd learned they could depend on each other in ways they'd never imagined. The official investigation had resulted in criminal charges against 3 individuals associated with the property management company, while civil lawsuits were still working their way through the courts with the assistance of legal aid attorneys who'd taken an interest in the case. But the most visible changes were happening on the streets themselves. The community mural project had started as Diego's idea, a way to transform the blank wall facing the community center into something that celebrated the neighborhood's resilience. What began as a small artistic gesture had grown into a weekly gathering, where neighbors of all ages contributed to an expanding canvas that told their collective story. This morning, the scent of fresh paint mixed with the aroma of Mrs. Herrera's coffee as she set up a folding table with papel picado fluttering overhead in the slight breeze. Children carried small containers of water for brush cleaning, while teenagers managed the more complex artistic elements under the guidance of Mrs. Rodriguez, an art teacher from the middle school who volunteered her Saturdays to the project. Raphael worked alongside Noah, installing a new set of shelves in Evelyn's apartment, an upgrade funded partly by the community's small fundraising efforts, and partly by Evelyn's settlement from the lawsuit. The familiar sounds of construction mixed with conversations in Spanish and English, laughter from children playing in the courtyard, and the distant music that always seemed to emanate from someone's radio. "Hand me that level," Noah said, balancing a wooden shelf against the wall where new photographs were waiting to be displayed. Pictures of Maddie's school events, community gatherings, and the gradual restoration of normalcy to their lives. Leon arrived carrying lunch from the taqueria down the street, bags of food still warm and aromatic enough to make everyone pause their work to appreciate the simple pleasure of sharing a meal together. Patrice brought updates on 2 other neighborhoods where similar patterns of fraud had been identified and stopped, her success in documenting their case having led to a consulting role with the city's housing authority. "Mrs. Martinez wants to know if we can help review her lease renewal," Patrice mentioned while distributing plastic forks and napkins. "She's nervous about signing anything after what happened here." "Of course," Raphael replied, understanding that their informal network of support had become a permanent fixture in the neighborhood's landscape. "Tell her to bring everything on Tuesday. We'll go through it together." Evelyn emerged from her bedroom carrying a frame that held Daniel Blake's military service photo, the formal portrait of a young man in uniform, who had no idea his decision to show mercy to a frightened teenager would ripple forward to save his own family decades later. She found the perfect spot for it among the other family pictures, where afternoon light would catch the glass at just the right angle. Maddie burst through the front door with the energy of a 9-year-old who'd spent the morning helping paint clouds on the upper portion of the mural, her clothes speckled with blue and white paint, her smile wide enough to light up the room. "Raphael, you have to come see the dedication part, Miss." Rodriguez finished the letters and everything. Outside, the mural had grown to cover the entire wall facing the street, its imagery telling the story of a community that had learned to protect itself, houses in warm colors, families of different backgrounds sharing common spaces, children playing while adults watched with protective attention, and in the corner, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look, small text that read, "For Daniel Blake, who chose hope over revenge, and taught us that redemption lives in the promises we keep." Raphael stood with his hands in his pockets, the $5 bill with a 1327 still folded carefully in his wallet. Not forgotten, but transformed from a burden into a reminder that the best parts of human nature could survive even the worst circumstances. Around him, neighbors gathered to admire the morning's progress on the mural, their voices creating a soundtrack of contentment and belonging. Maddie slipped her paint-stained hand into his, looking up at the artwork they'd all helped create. "Do you think my papa would like it?" Raphael squeezed her small fingers gently, thinking about second chances and communities that choose protection over profit, about promises kept across decades, and the way love could travel through time to arrive exactly when it was needed most. "I think he'd be proud of everything you did to save your family," Raphael said. "And I think he'd be happy to know his little girl helped save an entire neighborhood." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the painted wall, illuminating scenes of triumph that had grown from seeds of desperation planted months earlier. Children played in the foreground while adults worked and laughed and planned for futures that suddenly seemed possible again, their voices carrying the particular music that happens when people discover they're stronger together than they ever imagined they could be alone. Raphael looked around at the faces of neighbors who'd become family, at the building that had been saved by courage disguised as a $5 bill, and a child's faith and promises kept, and understood finally that some debts could only be repaid by creating something larger than the original gift. Community instead of charity, belonging instead of obligation, hope instead of fear. What moments of unexpected kindness have shaped your own life? Have you ever been part of a community that came together to protect one of its own? Would you like another story?